Check out how beautiful this turned out. 14 karat gold with California gold nuggets in the middle from Gold Country. I completely handmade that design myself. Turned out really beautiful. So what I did was I handmade this out of silver, except for the top part. That's a bought piece. But you can see that little sheet there on the side. So I got this square wire and I bent it into a round circle. I got this silver sheet. I soldered it onto silver sheet. And I got one of these components and I soldered that on top. And then I had that done right there. See on the side, you can see the sheet. And then I got this brass wire, thick brass wire. I took it to this little anvil and I hammered it flat. And you can see where I flattened it with the hammer right there so that it meets the equal thickness of that silver piece. So what's next is to make a professional jewelry silicone mold. So that's the funnel. So what you're creating now is a negative space. So there's what goes in the middle of the silicone mold. So I got my silicone mold block. There's my silicone. You cut that into sheets. So you cut that into 3 sheets and you put down 1 sheet, cut it off right there, and you put that sheet in the block, and then you put your item to be molded in between layers of silicone. Next up, you go to the vulcanizer. You heat this thing up to 350 degrees for like an hour, and then it's a gnarly press, as you can see. So you take your block with your silicone in the middle, and you put it in the vise. And you put it in the vise there for 45 minutes. And what it does is it fuses all the silicone sheets together, and because it heats up, it expands a little bit, and it captures every detail of the mold that you're making a mold of. So then I got my silicone, and I take it over to the jeweler's bench, and you get an X-Acto knife, and you have to hand cut this open, and this is an art just in itself, cutting silicone molds. So what you do is you run the X-Acto around the side like that and create a lock so the top and bottom lock together. And then you have to peel it open and slowly cut it into 2 separate pieces while not messing up that design. You have to know how to slice it down the side of the design. See, I'm showing you right now how the silicone mold captured that design. Alright, now you got your silicone mold. Alright, so what's next is you take your silicone mold and you take it over to the wax pump injector. This is a wax pump injector that you heat up for like an hour, and it's pressurized by a air compressor. So what it does is it creates a pressure inside of that hot wax pot so that it pushes wax out at whatever different pressure you want. You can adjust it. So you got your silicone block right here that holds the top and bottom of the molds together perfectly even, and then you press on that and it pushes, it injects the wax into the mold. And then you have to hold it there for a little while so that the whole thing fills with every detail of the hot wax gets pressed into the mold, injected into the mold. Alright, so after you peel it apart, you hopefully, if you did it right, you got this. That's wax right there, that blue. You have a perfect, exact, every detail down to the tiniest detail. You have an exact copy. Right here. Perfect, exact copy of your master. And quite often you have to touch up the wax just a little bit. You can see kind of this little dimple in the blue right there. You can see it. So you have to like hot melt little dabs of wax on there and get the wax ready. And so next you take your wax. It's the lost wax casting technique that's been the same casting technique that's been going down on this planet for thousands of years. So next up I got my flask. In the wax model, I attach it to the inside of the bottom of that flask where I just showed you. So now the flask is done. You take your silicone plaster. This is like a cement type thing with an ultra fine silicate. And you mix it up in a bowl with water. And then next, and you mix it all up, make sure it's all nice, and you have to mix it up to the right consistency. And you pour it into the flask. So the wax model is now at the bottom inside there, attached to the middle, facing up. Pour it in there. Next up, you have to vacuum out the air bubbles. So you got this gnarly vacuum machine. And you put your flask, your investment that's still wet, not dried, and you put it in there and you turn on this gnarly vacuum machine for a couple minutes and it bubbles out all the air inside there. Next, you put this aside and let the investment cure. Now that the investment's cured and rock solid, you take the bottom off, and now the wax is inside of that plaster. So that thing would be full of plaster with the wax model inside of it, that blue model, and then you put it in there with the wax facing down in an oven for 6 hours, 6 to 8 hours at 900. You go to 900 degrees over 6 hours, and then you let it sit in there for an hour at 900 degrees. Next up, you got your centrifuge. It's really hard to lock this with one hand. My other hand holding the camera. Okay, now I got my centrifuge locked. So what is that? That is the crucible. That's where you melt the metal. You can see there's a hole in the back of the crucible. That's where the metal will be centrifuge shot into the mold, into the flask. So next up, I got your really large torch. And what you do is you got to heat up the crucible. You don't just throw the metal in there cold. So after the crucible is really glowing, nice and hot, you go over, you got your tongs, you get your flask out, and this baby's 900 degrees. And you put it right there in the centrifuge, right behind the crucible, with the opening facing that hole in the back of the crucible. I'm just showing you this to show you how much work went into that tiny little beautiful gold pendant I just made. So next I got the big torch and I put my gold in there, 14 karat gold, and then I melt it down until it's a liquid. And once that gold is liquid, you let her rip. With the torch still going, you don't pull the torch away. And right there, the liquid gold shoots into the flask, filling every space that the melted wax, now the wax model that was inside there has been melted out. So it created a negative space inside the flask. A negative space inside that investment, that cement. Next up, it's still 900 degrees. So you get it out with the tongs. Put it aside for a couple minutes and wait for the metal to stop glowing red, because when you pull it out of there, it's glowing red. And then you dunk it in water. And then at that point, hopefully, if everything turned out, you'll have your casting. And now the casting is a whole nother thing. you got to clean up the surface of the casting. The castings don't just come out of that thing all shiny at all. There's a surface texture from the whole process. So next up, I got my tiny little jeweler's torch. And what I'm going to do is, I got these gold nuggets that someone found here in Grass Valley, Nevada City area that I bought. And just those little bit of gold, that's expensive right there. Gold is very expensive an ounce. I'm not sure if you guys follow gold, but gold is really high right now, and it's only going to go up. So next up, after I've soldered in the nuggets, and that's a whole art in itself, making them all fit in there, but I've been doing that for years, you have to clean up the casting. So you take that little polished rubber wheel and you clean up the jewelry, and then next up you got to polish it, high polish. So I got this professional buffing unit, and to polish on the inside of the bail is where the chain goes through. You have to take these little brushes and you have to polish in every little crevice of the jewelry. And then you take that and you get the next little crevice, and that's all done with that Fordham foot pedal flex shaft dental drill. And then after you've done that, you take it to this high buff and you buff out the whole thing. Next up is the ultrasonic. You got to clean off the polishing compound from the polishing procedure. So you got your heated up water, turn on your ultrasonic, which is not a cheap tool, and then you put it on that hanger, on the plastic hanger, and you soak it in there, and the ultrasonic sound rattles off the dirt off of the jewelry. And then there you go. Absolutely awesome. Those little nuggets turned out so cool looking inside there. It's really cool. Check that thing out. California gold nuggets in a handmade design that I handmade myself. Thank you for watching.